Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so glad you've joined me this evening. I have got the most phenomenal story for you tonight that you're absolutely going to love. It comes from a sheep farmer in Oregon called Paul, who had several encounters with Bigfoot during his life. I just want to send my love to all my viewers around the world. And if you haven't subscribed, please do, because I have got so many letters coming into me of stories that are coming out of the woodwork that people have kept secret for so many long years, and they're finally willing to share in this anonymous forum because I have guaranteed them confidentiality, and that has reassured so many of them to come forward with their Bigfoot stories, and some of them are utterly extraordinary. So you don't want to miss out on those. And I just want to thank my current subscribers for all their support. I really love you guys. You definitely rock. Let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Paul, and I've been a sheep farmer for over 20 long years now at my farm here in Corvallis in Oregon. I grew up on this farm all my life, which belonged to my late father until he died in 1995. And being his only son, I naturally, very fortunately inherited the land. I also, along the way, got a degree in animal science when I was younger, which has helped me considerably become the knowledge, experienced sheep farmer that I am today. I am married to a beautiful woman called Hattie, and I have two young boys, Robert 19 and Jason 17. I have had various experiences with Bigfoot over my life, and so I will tell you about those encounters. But before I do, let me describe the rural setting where I live, so that your listeners can paint a picture in their minds of my sheep farm and the location of my Bigfoot experience. I live in a visually stunning location in an old 1880s farmhouse that my father restored to pristine perfection when I was a young boy. Over the years, I've done some renovations of my own to the house, and so I have managed to keep the historic integrity of the place, I'm glad to say. On my farm currently, I have about 280 lambs and 190 ewes, and the sheep that I farm are known as hair sheep because they do not require sharing, which for me would be a laborious job to do because it requires a very skilled professional hand and it needs to be done exceedingly fast. My sheep shed their hair naturally once a year, but the meat from my sheep is mild and extremely tender, and believe me, they taste delicious. Of course, it does help to give your animals the best nutrition possible with all the necessary minerals like selenium and zinc, because this ensures the health and vitality of the sheep and also the quality and the taste of the meat. I have what I call a rotational feeding system as far as the grazing is concerned, which means that certain pastures are rested for only 45 days before the sheep can graze there again. This gives the rested grazing land a chance to regenerate and revive itself before it is grazed again. I seeded my pasture again 5 years ago, using different grasses like lush orchard grasses, including spreading grasses like red clover, and so I've enhanced their diet considerably. I never give my sheep grain, but they have a porridge-based diet and a high-quality hay, especially during the winter months. I also have a solar-powered watering system, which is fantastic on my land. And I have 2 Pyrenees dogs that stay and look after the lambs and sheep, protecting them from predators like coyotes. And they are brilliant at their jobs. They never leave the land. I have a lot of grazing land on my property for sheep, but I also have a lake and a pond on the land as well as a forest that stretches back for many miles. The views of the stunning rolling countryside and magnificent mountain valleys are utterly spectacular and breathtaking, and I consider myself remarkably privileged to live in such an idyllic country setting. You should see the golden sunsets on my land, as they truly are a sight to behold, and a gentle reminder of why I do this work. Over the years, we were aware of strange whooping sounds from the valley that definitely sounded like primate calls. I don't think they could have been anything else. And we could hear these calls being answered back on the other side of the valley. We would also get to hear wood knocks very frequently, and we still do today. And some from time to time we would hear banging around our own home. When my dad did renovate our property, when I was a young boy, that was when the banging increased intensely. At first, my mother thought the property was haunted because of the renovations that she believed had energized the spirits of previous owners of our property. However, we were to find strange boulders outside our outbuildings that something had thrown at us during the night. We also got to see huge 16-inch footprints in the mud around our land. That, however, did not stop my mother from calling in a team of paranormal investigators to test the property for spirits, but luckily there was no sign of activity. At first, my father thought those footprints we had seen must have belonged to a bear. Luckily, the activity eventually did die down, although we did have a mysterious event when one day a bag of oats vanished from an outbuilding and the door had been broken down by something exceedingly big. Of course, my father thought we had been robbed, but none of our expensive farming equipment had been seized. One day when I was playing by the lake as a young boy, I do remember seeing what I believe was a bear standing in the water with its back turned away from me. Its body was just covered in brown hair with silver root tops, and it was only when I saw it grabbing a frog which it started to eat that I realized it wasn't a bear, because it had hands like we do and not paws. I remember how terrified I was of this creature. It truly was an apex predator, and it had an incredible presence about it, something that you just do not forget. My heart was pounding and my whole body was shaking and trembling because I could see that this creature could potentially kill me and could be more brutal than a bear. I knew it could snap my neck just like it did a twig. I remember hiding and watching the thing behind a little bush. For a moment, in terror, I thought it had detected me by the way it was sniffing the air with its nose, as if it had got a whiff of my scent. If it knew I was there, it still left me alone, but it did seem to make a hasty retreat to the forest line and glance several times over its shoulders in my direction. For a moment, I did get a brief view of the creature's long humanoid face. Luckily, it never saw me, but I did watch it glide very gracefully into the woody area, and it was so incredibly flawless the way it moved, and it was so fast, almost equaling to the gallop of a horse on those long, lean, muscular legs. I always remember that I never told my father what I'd seen, because I knew he would think I was making it up, as we had never heard of creatures like this before. One day we heard a strange noise outside our front door, and two of our Pyrenees dogs that always stayed with the sheep were scratching on the door to be let in. They behaved in such a strange way and were whimpering and yelping in terror. They were cowering in fear, so we knew something was very wrong because they had never behaved like that before, and they never left the sheep unattended. My father dashed over to the sheep pasture with his rifle in hand, and when he came back he said that there was the most intolerable smell in the area that he could not describe, but it was very sulphurous and disgusting. He also said that there were 3 sheep that had vanished mysteriously without a trace, although he had found some spilled blood on the grass, and it looked as if it was leading to the wooded area on our land. He found a strange bundle of brown human-like hair that had snagged itself on a nearby tree branch. It was all very odd. In my childlike mind, I was almost certain it was the creature I had seen by the lake, eating a frog, that was responsible for this heinous crime. But believe it or not, I never breathed a word of it to my father. I think the thing that bewildered me most about the disappearing sheep was that the 2 Pyrenees dogs that faithfully guarded the sheep were so terrified of this predator, yet they were so brilliant at chasing after coyotes without any problems. So whatever had taken those sheep was an exceedingly dangerous predator, so much so that the Pyrenees dogs had been threatened with their very lives, and that I knew was definitely true. Luckily, we had no more cases of sheep going missing on our farm after that, and over many years everything was relatively quiet, calm and normal, until one day when things changed dramatically. This was shortly after I'd taken over the farm from my dad, after he had sadly passed away 2 years after my mother. I always believed he died of a broken heart, because he was so grieved over my mother's passing from pancreatic cancer. One day on my land, we were having major problems with about 60 or more coyotes on our property who were attacking all our sheep. Even though our Pyrenees dogs would chase after the coyotes, the problem was that they were outnumbered and outsmarted by these clever, crafty creatures. So while my dogs were chased after a few coyotes, the others would creep into the pasture and attack the sheep. These coyotes would kill my sheep swiftly by cutting their throats just behind the jaw and below the ear. My dogs were utterly exhausted from the nightly activities and visits from the coyotes, and despite my dogs' best efforts, they had succeeded in taking down a few of our sheep. I knew I had to manage the situation, as these sheep are my livelihood, and I could not afford to lose them to the predators. So I planned a night hunt, and I got my 2 teenage sons involved in the plan because they loved hunting and were great with rifles. I also needed to use my epic thermal hunting tool to help me locate these creatures with thermal imagery. We did manage to take down 20 of these coyotes, and then my 2 sons suddenly saw these strange tall figures in the thermal with rarely huge girths and long arms standing in the forest line, watching the whole shootout. One of these creatures dropped to all fours like a dog and ran towards one of the dead coyotes scattered across the ground. I imagined this was to make himself smaller, and then he lowered himself onto the grass so that he became as flat as the ground, and then he wiggled his body forwards towards the dead coyote, which he grabbed, lifted on his shoulder, and then rose on 2 legs to a height of about 7 feet, and then proceeded to sprint right back to the forest line, then throwing the dead corpse of the coyote like a frisbee in the air, where it landed into one of the tall figure's arms. He kept repeating this process over and over again until every one of the tall figures had their own coyote in their arms. I imagine they were going to have quite a feast that night. I did not care that they had taken the coyotes because I knew what they were, but I did not tell my son in case he talked about it to his mates at school and got ridiculed for believing in Bigfoot. I know how easy it is for teenagers to get bullied, and these are the years when they can be remarkably sensitive. One boy at my son's school took his own life because the kids were teasing him about his acne and calling him Scarface. I cannot imagine what those poor parents went through when they found him hanging in the closet the next day. What a dreadful waste of a life, and how sad. I told my son that it was all a trick of the light and those creatures were all probably bears. They just accepted my word for it without challenging me, although I'm not sure that they actually believe me because my boys are incredibly bright. At the very least, I hope they've learnt not to mention the hairy man, because if the stigma gets attached to them, it may not do them any good. The next day I looked at the area where the creatures had crawled up to the coyote on all fours, and there was the most massive humanoid fist print in the ground, and the area smelt pretty rank, which was possibly the body odour from this Bigfoot. I have not seen one of these creatures' faces close up, only the side view of the face, but at a guess I would say they are 500 pounds and 6 to 7 feet tall. When I go into that wooded area, I have sometimes heard whistling in the woods and seen trees bent over in circular loops like some kind of marking, so I know they're still around. Also, when I go into the woods, whenever they become quiet and still, I know these things are there, because I can feel their eyes on me. So I do try to avoid the forests as much as I can. And that is my story. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for that incredible story. I love your description of being a sheep farmer and what it involves, because I've learned something new tonight, something I never knew before. And I didn't even know that you could get sheep that you couldn't really shear. So that's something that I've learned tonight, and I'm sure my listeners have too. So thank you so very much. And I love the way that those Bigfoot stole the coyotes and actually obviously had a good send-off together. Until next time, goodbye and good night.